Three ways to pick the best pine species for your reforestation. Land type. That is pretty much what type of soils do you have on your property? Because this is something that you can't change. You can't dream, you can't wish away. It's kind of the status quo, no matter how much you may want to grow a cactus. If you have a swamp, it's just not going to happen. So you really need to be able to understand what type of soils and what type of land you have. Red clay. If you have red clay, that means you have probably more acidic soils, and loblolly pine is going to be the best pine generally, on average, stereotyping here, to plant. Now, compared if you have a sandy hill, but if you have very sandy sites, longleaf is going to be the pine that's probably most suitable for that. Doesn't mean you can't plant other pines, but sand land types tend to drain very quickly. So you want a pine that can tolerate a little bit less water compared to clays, which hold water a lot more, and loblolly handles wet feet is what we call it a little bit more. Now, if you're on the coastal regions, gumbo. The only way I could kind of describe gumbo to those that don't know what gumbo is just think of someone going muddy. It's just that real thick, dark dirt that's like mud. It's really sticky. It's common in those swampy areas. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a wetland. I will say that too. Gumbo tracks don't necessarily always mean wetland sites. Some of them are just naturally this way. And again, loblolly is probably going to be your better suited pine for these types of areas because, again, it has a lot of water, and loblolly tends to do a little bit better in areas that hold water a little bit more and that are a little bit more acidic. And if you have a loamy silt, but it's really that just ideal, very fertile soil, you'll grow pines very, very quickly. And in these types of soils, really, you kind of get to pick whichever one you want to do. With the proper site prep, you can plant loblolly, longleaf, or slash. This is just like the ideal type of soil type. Now, if you don't know what type of soils you have, you've never thought about it, never even paid attention, how do you determine what type of sites you have? NRCS has a site called Web Soil Survey, and I'm going to show you an example. So this is the Web Soil Survey site. It's NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Services. You can simply just in Google, Web Soil Survey, and this site should come up for you. Again, this is going to be the make or break factor of what you can grow on your site, because you can't change if you have red clay or if you have gumbo. And so the other two characteristics we're going to be talking about are all going to kind of fall in line with this. You have to determine what type of land you have, and that's really going to narrow in on your options. Red clay, loblolly, you can plant longleaf out there depending on some of the factors. So the second most important thing for determining what pine you should plant is going to be your goals and involvement. Goals are your objectives. What are your objectives for your tract? And I'm just going to go through two examples here. The most common objective is economics. It's an investment. You want to get some type of income out there. And so with economics, you're looking to grow your trees, your crop trees, as fast as possible. You're likely looking at shorter rotations, and when I say short, I mean 25 years, probably 25 to 30, no more than 30 years on average. What is your best pine if you want a high income, fast economics type of priority? Loblolly. Loblolly is your fastest growing tree, and it's going to give you your shortest rotations because it is your fastest growing tree. Second, in my opinion, would be longleaf with pine straw raking. If you take out pine straw raking, longleaf is going to become the end, like the last resort, simply because it does have a little bit longer rotation age if you're planting longleaf, and it has a higher investment cost. So you're usually investing a little bit more to plant longleaf up front, and then you're growing it out a little bit more. But when you pair it up with pine straw raking, you can really increase your income and economics return on investment, your ROI. And the third is slash. Now, I don't have anything against slash. Slash to me is kind of like that compromised tree. It has pine straw revenue opportunities, but it's not as lucrative as longleaf because the needles aren't as long, they're not as pretty, they don't last as long. So you get a lower rate per acre rate or per bale rate for slash pine straw. But you do have that option, and it has a little bit more transitional suitability compared to loblolly and longleaf. It kind of fits in those areas that aren't really ideal maybe for either or. Slash is a great option. So to me, it's kind of that third choice, because if I can choose the fastest growing tree, I'm always going to pick loblolly. If I'm looking for something a little bit longer term, but with more periodic income, I'm looking at pine straw revenue most likely. So I'm considering longleaf if I can do that. But if I don't want to do some of the mid-management requirements that longleaf has, slash is my go-to, where I can get that medium income, but without maybe the high investment costs or the burning requirements, especially with longleaf. Now, the second most common objectives, of course, is wildlife. And I'm going to put wildlife slash conservation, because some folks will have more of that generalized conserving, doing what's best for the land, for the forest as a whole type of mindset. And that usually complements wildlife habitat very well. You're likely looking at longer rotations. So you're not looking to do that fast growth as quick as possible, clear cut type thing. You're probably doing periodic thinnings, or you're doing maybe at least 2 thinnings before you do your final clear cut. And you're likely probably doing some burning or other type of mid-management activities to really help the understory. Number one, longleaf. And longleaf is your best choice for this simply because of the burning aspect. You can start burning really early with longleaf around age 2, and then kind of keep a burning regime, which of course helps the understory, helps the habitat a lot better than if you were to do chemical spraying, which you couldn't do as regularly. And the second, slash and loblolly, these are kind of equal in terms, because you would treat them management wise and prescription wise very similarly. I will say almost any pine tree can typically meet any objective if it's on its ideal soil type. So a loblolly tree can meet a conservation type of mindset on red clay very easily. It doesn't necessarily have to be longleaf because that's better for wildlife. A pine tree is a pine tree in most cases to most wildlife species. 3, budget. Can't do anything without at least a little bit of money. So first question, do you have any cost share? Are you enrolled in any type of cost share programs? But if you do have cost share, or if you want to get cost share, your number one priority is probably going to be longleaf, because longleaf has a lot more program opportunities and usually ranks a lot higher than the other two, the slash and loblolly. Site prep needs. So when I talk about this, what type of site prep do you need, and what type of site prep have you done? If you have a cleaner site, and when I say cleaner, I mean there's not a lot of understory, a lot of brush you have to work through. You can kind of see your entire tract or your entire stand and see all the trees and rows of where they're going to be planting. You can really plant any type of pine, but you're definitely going to be probably prioritizing longleaf compared to if you have a messier site. Longleaf may not survive as well in a messier site prep. Seedling costs. Longleaf is generally more expensive than loblolly, but this is genetics dependent. Loblolly has a ton of genetic options for you to look into. And so if you get very high genetics, that seedling initial cost isn't going to be nearly as drastic, nearly as different. And then this also varies, depends if you have bare root versus containerized. Bare root is generally cheaper than containerized. And these are 2 examples you can see in these photos. Containerized just means it has like a plug of dirt with it, compared to bare root means it has no dirt. And there's, of course, pros and cons with all of these. Your 3 characteristics of how are you going to determine which pine you should plant with. Number 1, your land. What type of land site do you have? Number 2, what are your goals and objectives? And then number 3, what are your budgetary concerns? Do you have a cost share program? What type of site prep are you doing? Are you having to do a little bit messier site prep, or can you have a cleaner site? And then how much are you willing to invest into your seedling costs? Now, so what should you do? You're like, okay, cool. This is great. Now, what do I do? And I would say, ask yourself these questions and write it down, because hopefully you weren't expecting me to tell you, hey, you should go plant this pine on your property, because as you know, most of the answers in forestry, or if you don't know, you're fixing to know, is it depends. Most of the time they're going to say it depends on X, Y, and Z. And that's really my answer most of the time. So number 1, what is the soil like at the site? What is the soil like at the area that you want to replant specifically? What is your goal for the property? This can be different for what is your goal for this stand? How engaged do you want to be with this tract? Do you have any cost share to help with the reforestation? How much are you willing to invest into seedling genetics? And last, what is the rest of the property planted in? And again, this is if you have 100 plus acres of planted pine, you might want to consider diversifying what you have out there.